when we practice this writing the equation for sine and cosine, just the once. So we're going to do this again. And we're going to follow all these steps and read through all these steps to really help us to get this right. It says first draw the new axis. Check to make sure that the distance above and below the axis is the same. As I can see here, it goes from -2 to -4, which means -3 would be right in the middle. So my new axis is at y equals -3. So that's my first step. The second step says draw the key points, the points on the axis as well as the highs and lows. On the axis, highs and lows. Okay. Third, draw or label my starting points. Sine starts on the axis and goes up. This would be sine right here. And then again right here. Cosine starts at the high and goes down. So cosine starts here. That's the only one I see for cosine. So now I'm going to set up my table for y equals sine of x and y equals cosine of x. So let's look at the phase shift for sine. That's the star. When I look at these two stars, this one's obviously closest to the original starting point. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the starting point that's closest to the y-axis. Maybe we should write that down as a fourth step. Circle starting points that are closest to the y-axis. And the reason we're doing that is the y-axis is where it normally would start. It would normally start right here for sine or right here for cosine. So we're going to circle starting points that are closest to the y-axis. That would be this star right here and this straight line right there. Those are my starting points for sine and cosine. So my phase shift looks like on this graph everything is a pi over 3. If you can just figure out what the first one is, then it tells you what all, this would be 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, 4/3, 5/3. -1/3, -2/3, -3/3, -4/3, -5/3. So this is left pi over 3. The vertical shift is where the axis is, down 3. My scale change, if I want, not my scale change, I'm sorry, my translation rule is going to be x minus pi over 3, because it's left pi over 3 and the rule tells the truth all the time. The rule does not lie. And y minus 3. Therefore, my equation is y equals sine of x plus pi over 3 minus 3. So I wonder if we should write a fifth step here. I'm just thinking of when you have to do this without my instruction, your next step would be to using the phase shift and vertical shift write the rule, the translation rule. That's what the T stands for. And notice I didn't say anything lies, because in the rule nothing lies. So that would be your fifth step. Okay? All right, let's come over here now to cosine. My phase shift here for cosine. Now, to me, it does not look like this one was lined up with the pi over 3. This, to me, does not look lined up with the pi over 3. So what we say in, what I'm going to tell you in all of these graphs is that it's either on the mark or halfway. I'm not going to make you guys say, oh, that looks like it's 2/3 of the way or 1/3 of the way. It's either on the mark or halfway. And if I had to guess right here, when I look at this point right there, I'd say it's not on the mark. I'm going to say halfway. Well, half of 1/3 is 1/6. So we're going to say right pi over 6. Still down 3. So my rule is x plus pi over 6, y minus 3. So when I go to write my equation, I get y equals cosine of x minus pi over 6, because it lies in the equation, minus 3. All right, so I'm going to practice this some more on this next page. It says the graphs below show the image for y equals sine, cosine, and tangent. Find the equation for each graph. There is no scale change for any of these functions, so we're just looking at translations. And notice for numbers 1 and 2, we're just doing sine. That's all we're doing. All right, I'm going to follow the steps that I wrote down. So I'm going to keep looking back at the steps that I wrote. And in my first step, I said to draw the new axis, check to make sure the distance above and below is the same. All right, so this goes from 0 to 2. I'm going to draw my axis at 1. My next step says to draw my key points on the axis as well as highs and lows. This is on the axis, this is a high, this is a low, and that's all I have. I'm sorry, these are on the axis, this is a high. I guess we could say this right here looks like a low. It looks like it's going to start to turn up. This one looks like it needs to go a little bit farther. So on the axis, high and a low. All right, my next step says to draw or label my starting point. Now I only have to focus on sine. And remember, sine starts on the axis and goes up, which would be right here on the axis and goes up. So that's my starting point for sine. So I can write my scale change using my phase shift and my vertical shift. My scale change, not my scale change, I'm sorry, my translation rule. My translation rule is left pi over 3, so x minus pi over 3. And this is up 1, so y plus 1. So that is my translation rule for this graph. Therefore, my equation is y equals sine of x plus pi over 3 plus 1. Okay, let's go to number 2 and follow all the same steps. The first step is to draw my axis. It needs to be in the middle so that above and below the axis is the same distance. I go from a low of 0 to, well, actually that's the high, to a low of -2, and halfway is -1. Notice I'm one above and one below the axis, so I've drawn my axis in the correct place. Next, I label my key points on the axis, highs and lows. Okay. Then I look for the starting point for sine. The starting point for sine starts on the axis and moves up. These are my only two that are on the axis. This one's on the axis going down. This one's on the axis going up. So this is my starting point for sine right here. So I'm going to write my translation rule. I have moved to the right pi over 4, which is x plus pi over 4. And I have moved down. Now some people want to say, oh, I moved down too. No, you look for the axis. The axis went from being here at 0 to being at -1, so y minus 1. I can therefore write my equation, y equals the sine of x minus pi over 4, because it lies in the equation, minus 1. Okay, let's go to number 3, cosine. All right, I go from 4 to 6, so in the middle would be 5. That's where I would draw my axis, and I check it. I'm 1 above and 1 below, so I know I've drawn my axis in the correct place. Then I'm going to label key points on the axis, and then highs and lows. Now I'm focused on cosine. Cosine starts at a high and goes down. High goes down, high, and goes down. Well, which of these is closer to the y-axis? This one right here. Okay, so now I'm ready to write my translation rule. I have moved to the right pi over 2, x plus pi over 2, and my axis was at 0 originally and has moved up to 5, y plus 5. So my new equation is y equals the cosine of x minus pi over 2, because x lies in the equation, plus 5. Okay, number 4. Again, I got to find where my axis is. I go from -3. Well, I'm sorry, this is -1, -2, -3. So from -1 to -3. In the middle is -2. And I notice that I'm 1 above and 1 below. That's how I know I've drawn my axis in the correct place. I label my key points, which are on the axis, as well as highs and lows. Now for cosine, my starting point, that's not my next thing, is a high going down. This is the only high I see, and it is going down, so this is my starting place. Okay, now I'm ready to write my translation rule. I moved to the left. That looks like pi over 6, because this is pi over 6. This must be negative pi over 6. So x minus pi over 6. And I'm at -2 instead of 0, so y minus 2 for the axis. So my equation is y equals the cosine of x plus pi over 6. Minus 2. Right. For tangent, what I need to look for is where did my asymptotes move, and does it look like my normal tangent graph has the asymptotes. So let's look for that first. I can tell that I have an asymptote here, and then again here, and then it looks like it would be again here. My asymptotes are normally at pi over 2, so they've moved either left or right pi over 2, because I can see that I have a new asymptote here to the left. I also have a new asymptote here to the right, so I would say that it moved left or right pi over 2. So when I do my translation rule, that would be x plus or minus pi over 2. And then I've got to look, does it look like my curve has moved up or down at all? To me, it still looks like the center of that curve, where it changes direction and kind of starts going the other way, is still right here at 0. It didn't move up or down at all, so just y. So I get y equals the tangent